Here is a nice article from Inside Climate News, which is an independent organization which produces some really good reports. It focused on US promise of supplying liquefied natural gas to Europe to reduce its dependence on Russian gas, to increase its energy security in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and longer-term realignments of the geopolitics. And immediately the promise made by Biden raised heckles with the environmentalists and many of the states along the Gulf Coast. So this is another example of how energy security is always going to be a big factor and can push climate action to the back burner with such geopolitical, socioeconomic perturbations. So I'm going to just show some images of the potential impacts on the Gulf and how the export of US gas is increasing over time, and sudden demand from the federal government to supply more gas to Europe is going to make the Gulf Coast states pay the price. So this is kind of an example of a third man syndrome where the president makes the decision without considering the details, but the people who pay the price have to worry about the consequences. So here is John Allaire checking a trap for fish or crabs on his coastal property in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, south of Lake Charles. And here are the John Allaire's newly revealed juvenile red drum and shrimp. John Allaire takes a scoop of water from the pond on his property in Cameron Parish, adjacent to where the Commonwealth LNG export terminal is proposed. So he's just making his living over there, and some big decision is going to come down and going to affect his livelihood. Construction is underway at the Plaquemines LNG natural gas liquefaction and export terminal being developed about 20 miles south of New Orleans on a several hundred-acre site that spans both sides of the State Highway 23. Obviously, such a news of increased export is going to make the energy companies very happy. Funds are going to flow, and there are many people who will benefit, but there are many who are going to pay the price in terms of all the pollution in their backyard and direct impact on their livelihood based on farming fish and catching crabs and so on and so forth. Nationally, the tracker identifies 27 new or expanding LNG terminal facilities that have been constructed or proposed, which collectively have the potential to emit as much as 117 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year, said Alexandra Sheikovich, who assembled the tracker. That's as much as 23 million gasoline-powered cars per year, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, or nearly all of the cars in California. Good thing that California has very strict fuel standards, so that will be less than 23 million cars in any other state in the US. Okay, so here are some numbers on US LNG export. The US now leads the world in the exports of LNG, which have climbed dramatically amid a shale gas boom in the United States brought on by fracking. Fracking, which as you may know is about pumping water at high pressure into rocks and other places where shale gas is hidden and cannot easily be extracted. So fracking is hydraulic fracturing of these. There are lots of controversy associated with these about whether they induce micro earthquakes, but mostly also how they affect groundwater quality and so on and so forth. Obviously, they also increased oil production, and this is exporting emissions because the gasoline is burned elsewhere, and US energy intensity of the GDP goes down and carbon intensity of the energy goes down, but the emission happens elsewhere. So US liquefied natural gas exports in millions of cubic feet 1985 to 2021. So this is LNG. 1985 it was 52,883 cubic feet, remained fairly flat till 2015 and has skyrocketed since then exponentially to 3,560,818 cubic feet in 2021. With the Ukraine war and Biden promising more LNG to the European Union, this is going to jump up even more. Okay. US exports of LNG by country. Companies that export LNG by ocean-going vessels typically sign long-term contracts committing shipments over a period of 20 years. These are the countries that received the most LNG last year from the US. So by ship in millions of cubic feet in 2021. South Korea, about almost 500,000 cubic feet. China, similar numbers. Japan, Brazil, Spain, India, UK, Turkey, Netherlands, and France. So after the Ukrainian invasion by Russia, US suddenly made new agreements with Venezuela, started a dialogue. You remember, Venezuela has been facing internal issues of governance with Maduro and cancellation or cheating on elections and so on. So US has been the standard bearer trying to force fairer elections and democracy and so on Venezuela, but the Russian war has obviously set aside many concerns and has jump-started the communications with Venezuela and deals on oil to protect against impact of Russian oil supply and the war in general. The nearly 1,000-foot-long Noshumaru was loading liquefied natural gas on March 16th at the Venture Global Calcasieu Pass LNG export terminal in Cameron Parish. So you can see these are the kind of things that drift in and carry the LNG away. The Venture Global Calcasieu Pass export terminal, I don't know how it's pronounced, sorry, is seen through the rigging of a shrimp boat, you can see there, and hurricane debris in Cameron, Louisiana. State regulators on March 17 held a public hearing on the proposed Commonwealth LNG plant for nearby. You remember the Gulf went through massive Deep Horizon explosion and oil leak from which it is still recovering. A lot of cleanup work and research still goes on. BP was forced to fund a lot of the research as well, set up foundations to study various problems and find solutions and so on. The new Cheniere LNG export terminal is across the water in Louisiana from the neighborhood of Sabine Pass in Port Arthur, Texas. So the Gulf Coast is warming like crazy. It's already the warmest water body so far north and has had severe impacts in terms of supplying moisture, fueling hurricanes, favoring rapid intensification, bringing in loss of rain, and so on. The United States finds itself in a burgeoning crisis with an axis that is developing between Russia and China and other places that are going to squeeze us and make it even more difficult for us to meet our overall climate goals as a global community, said David Dismukis, professor and executive director of the Louisiana State University Center for Energy Studies. So this addresses what cascade of climate problems will emerge from US moves to help the European Union against this Russia-China axis that has developed before the Winter Olympics, where apparently Russia already had ideas on invading Ukraine. Export terminals can cost 9 to 12 billion each to develop, and typically construction can only proceed if the energy companies building them get bank financing. most that are proposed will likely not get built. So maybe that's good news. 2 ocean-going LNG vessels at the Cheniere LNG export terminal in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, right along the Louisiana and Texas state line near Port Arthur, Texas. So you can see how close they are to land. Gulf gas waiting on LNG export build out. So this is the Gulf of Mexico, Florida here, and Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas coasts along down here. So LNG terminals announced, operating, under construction, planned, operating and planned. So 2 plus 2, 4, 7, 18, 21 in total. So you can see they are beating the coast all along here. LNG terminal at a glance. Natural gas is delivered to an LNG liquefaction and export terminal via a pipeline. Natural gas goes through a pre-treatment process, and thirdly, large amounts of energy is used to cool natural gas to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit for liquefaction, at which point it becomes liquid and takes up much less space. So the energy density is increased as it is shipped across long distances. So here is the natural gas pipeline, pre-treatment, LNG liquefaction trains, and LNG storage tanks, and ocean-going vessels carry it to overseas ports where the process is reversed, where the LNG is converted back to gas to be used at the endpoint. So giant insulated vessels store the LNG here. So you can imagine that coastlines are severely affected by these, and any increase in export to Europe is going to affect the coastline fairly severely. Okay, and there are lots of communities that are already aware of the issues and have been fighting. Bishop Wilfred Johnson and the pastor at Oakville Missionary Baptist Church in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, talks with his brother Percy Johnson outside a local community center that is undergoing rehabilitation after damage from Hurricane Ida last year. So you can imagine that Gulf Coast is experiencing severe sea level rise, loss of natural defenses like mangroves, sinking land because of extraction of groundwater and gas and other things. So, and hurricanes. So it's a poster child for climate impacts. John Beard Jr., the founder and executive director of the Port Arthur Community Action Network, stands in front of the Exxon Mobil and Qatar Energy's Golden Pass LNG facility just south of Port Arthur, Texas. Baird has deep concerns about the rapidly expanding LNG exports industry along the Louisiana and Texas Gulf Coast. So communities are struggling there. Homes are right up against the oil and gas industry in Port Arthur, Texas. Okay, John Allaire explains some beach geology to James Hyatt along the Gulf of Mexico and Cameron Parish, Louisiana, south of Lake Charles. So sea level rise, hurricanes rapidly intensifying, slowing down, natural defenses lost, land sinking, also as post-glacial rebound actually is also causing subsidence. During the last glacial maximum, ice built up on northern North America, which pushed the land down, so land ahead of it was pushed up. Since the glaciers have been melting since 12,000 years, and due to global warming, the land that was pushed up is sinking down. So in the Gulf of Mexico, land is subsiding, made worse by extraction of groundwater and gas and oil and so on. Okay, so these are really not good combination of things. David Schull, who described himself as working in the oil and gas industry, speaks at a public hearing on an air pollution permit and environmental assessment held by Louisiana environmental regulators on March 17th in Cameron, Louisiana. He said the United States need to develop as much LNG as it can because we are in a war footing. Well, of course we are, but what are the consequences? Longtime environmental scientist Wilma Subra with Louisiana Environmental Action Network tells state regulators that they need to consider the cumulative impacts of toxic chemicals. Multiple LNG export terminals proposed for Cameron Parish including the Commonwealth LNG export, which is seeking an air pollution permit. So this is a good example of how global geopolitics and unintended consequence of somebody's adventure, like Putin invading Ukraine, end up creating problems for people who have nothing to do with anything about Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then US wants to, of course, help its allies in Europe defend themselves in terms of energy security against Russian invasion, but Gulf states end up paying the price. Of course, there is additional impacts from climate change that's already happening in terms of sea level rise, Gulf of Mexico warming, cyclones, rapid intensification, enhanced rainfall, and so on and so forth. So, good example of natural human system interactions and compound events that come together and impact negatively any climate action. Biden wants to be big on climate action, but he also has to respond to war and energy requirements for allies, and then there are these cascades and unintended consequences. Okay.